Let's do it.
Okay. Let's do it. Well, guys, here we are in episode 5. I almost said 6, but it's 5. This is our final episode of Parenting Simple. I mean, it's the last one.
The last one.
The last one. I'm Kevin. I'm the Global Kids Pastor here at Liberty, and this is Ashley, my wife. And now we're still not even convinced, honestly, that that was the right title for this series because parenting is not simple at all.
Right.
But we just kind of want to talk about some simple things we could do.
That's right. It's not simple at all, and we've talked about that for the last few weeks with you guys. But our purpose in this series has been to emphasize the priority in parenting, which is helping our kids understand who God is, and how they can have a relationship with Him. Because I think we maybe said this in one of the first episodes, but it's important for us to remember that 100 years from now, the only thing that is still going to matter when it comes to your kids is whether or not they have a relationship with God. That's the only thing that's going to matter. But in order to raise our kids with an understanding of what it means to have an authentic faith in the God who made them, it takes intentional conversation again and again and again over time.
And again and again.
Right.
And again over time, yes. So, it's important that we prioritize, having our family in church to gather with God's people, people who can encourage us, who can help us learn more about Jesus. And that's applicable for our kids as well, that we have us as parents in church with God's people, but also them. But it also means that as parents, that it's our primary responsibility. As a parent, it's our primary responsibility to make our time with our kids count, because it is the overtime thing. And so we do hope that the stories we've shared over the past few weeks so far, the tips that we've given, that hopefully they've been practical, hopefully they've been helpful for you as parents, hopefully it's kind of helped you think through your own parenting journey and to help you kind of think of some practical things that you can implement with your family, so that you can kind of take a deep breath, take a step back, on a daily basis, and simply kind of just tap into the rhythms that God's Word has even told us in Deuteronomy 6, the rhythms that He's given us every single day.
Right. So speaking of things that God has given you, that brings me to our very last icebreaker of the entire series. So we're going to talk about gifts for a moment, Kevin.
Gifts, okay.
Okay.
Wait, like the picture gifts, like the GIFs?
GIF. Is that a GIF or a GIF?
I don't know.
I think that's a GIF.
I feel like in my head, though, it always comes out as GIF. I don't know why.
Let us know if you think if it's GIF or GIF. Anyway, gift.
Gift. Okay, gift. Okay.
When you think about the gifts that you have received in your life, what is one that stands out? What's one of the greatest gifts that anybody has ever given you?
Well, you, Ashley.
Good one.
I get
but
points
for real.
Okay, sorry.
Like something that could be wrapped in a box or a gift bag.
Now, it's hard to pick one because, at different stages of your life, you think that, like, certain gifts are, better and whatever. But, so in the stage of life that I'm in now, I'd probably say one of the most recent gifts that I've gotten, which would be my smoker. So my wife gave me one thing I'm not good at is remembering, like, what I get gifts for, like, if it's for a holiday or a birthday, whatever. I'm terrible at that. But I think it was
his birthday.
Okay, oh yeah, birthday. But it was an offset smoker, like to smoke meat in or vegetables or whatever. But that's we've said it on here before, but that's one of my favorite things to do is to grill and to smoke meat. And so that was one of my favorite things, I would say.
Cool.
What about you?
So I love gifts. Gifts. So it's really hard to just pick one, especially in 38 years of life. But I would say one of the most meaningful, one of the most special gifts is the one that you gave me for our 10th wedding anniversary.
Score.
That's right. So Kevin knows me really well when it comes to gifts. He has learned a lot in the time that we've been together, but he knows that when it comes to giving me a gift, it has much less to do with the amount of money he spends on something and a whole lot more with how much thought he puts into something. And also he knows about me that I'm really not a big fan of like cliche gifts. So like big fancy flower bouquets or jewelry, it's just not, those are not things that speak to me very much. So our 10th wedding anniversary, Kevin ended up making these wooden signs, and it was a series of signs to put up on the wall in our home. But basically, they all had different coordinates of places that were significant in our relationship. So,
like the actual longitude and latitude of each location.
Yeah. So he like stenciled them onto these wooden plank board things. But so anyway, he listed different locations, like the place we were when he proposed to me, the church where we got married, and all of the different places that we've lived in our first 10 years of marriage, which has been a lot of places because we moved around a lot during those first 10 years. But anyway, so on that note, let's go ahead and dive right in, okay? So let's finish reading the remainder of the passage. Remember, we've been in Deuteronomy 6. In fact, I feel like because it's our last episode, let's start back, rewind a little bit just to kind of go back, remind you where we've come from. Starting back in verse 4, would you mind reading the whole thing? So verse 4 all the way until, I believe it's 12, is that right?
Yep, yep. Yeah. So Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting verse 4. This was Moses, once again, and he's talking to the Israelites, and he says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates." And then here's the part we're going to discuss tonight, starting in verse 10. It says, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you, a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then, when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." Okay, so this part of the passage, this last segment, is extremely powerful for me, but also it's extremely convicting because I know that all too often I am very guilty of forgetting. Maybe not forgetting altogether, but maybe sometimes losing sight of what God has given me, of what I know he's already done in my life. And I think sometimes our own selfish nature can cloud our vision, both of the past as well as the future. Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly why Moses is giving this warning or this reminder. In verse 10, he reminds the Israelites of the promise that he made to the Israelites, to God's people, so long ago. He does that to remind them, but also to remind us. I mean, we're reading this today, right? And he does it to remind us that when you read God's word, when you see or hear and read about a promise that God has made, then you can bank on it. Like he's gonna come through on it because it's a promise that he's made. And then Moses goes on to point out to the people that everything in the land that they are about to enter, the promised land, right? Everything in there none of it is anything that they have created. None of it is anything that they have built. None of it is anything that they have planted. Everything that is in this promised land, this land flowing with milk and honey, everything there is a gift from God. And then in verse 12, it kind of comes to the warning sign, like the warning label that you might see on a gift you might get, right? But the warning is not to forget that they need God. Don't let all the gifts, don't let all the good things, don't let all the things that come your way as a result of being in this land, don't let all of these things steal your focus away. Don't let it steal your reliance on God. That's right. So one of the closest examples of this, I think we all have examples in our lives where we can, think about things. But for me, it stood out the story of Isaac, who is our Isaac. You guys might know Isaac in the Bible, but our Isaac, who is now 9, and our second-born son. So rewind before he came around, but we had Oliver, who is our oldest. And when we had Oliver, we basically had
no hiccups, no flaws along the way in terms of bringing him into this world, right? It couldn't have been any more perfect. Like the journey of becoming, well, we've told you that becoming parents was hard, but having Oliver was basically flawless. It was easy for us to get pregnant. The pregnancy that I had with Oliver was very smooth. No problems. I felt great the entire time. No morning sickness, no health issues. And even to the point where I was like, I'm a weirdo that actually enjoyed labor and delivery. I know that that's crazy. If you've birthed a child before, you're probably sitting there thinking I'm absolutely crazy, but it's true.
Well, I hadn't birthed a child myself, and I think it's crazy as well. So.
I loved labor and delivery with Oliver. The whole experience was smooth, and he entered this world with like no hurdles of any kind. So, anyway, so that is what we thought that we kind of had that sort of.
Let me stop. So, I was there in the delivery room, like when Oliver was born, and like holding your hand. And I don't know that I would describe it as like a smooth experience.
Well.
It's labor, right? It's not a smooth experience. I may or may not have almost passed out. I don't do well in hospitals anyway, or like with shots, anything like that. So being in there with all that, I can't confirm or deny that. Let's just say that. So, but you were like a rock star in that time, and but you're right. Considering though all the things that could have gone wrong in a labor room. I guess it was pretty,
we were fortunate.
We were fortunate, yeah.
We were fortunate. And so because of that, okay, that was our first experience, having a kid. And so because of that, I think it made us, at least for me, it made me assume that going forward, everything would be no different than that. So we quickly learned that was not the case. When Oliver was about 10 months old, we got pregnant again. And then we ended up miscarrying that pregnancy. So after that happened, we gave ourselves some time, some space to grieve. We gave ourselves some time to heal, both emotionally as well as physically. But then later that year, we got pregnant again, and then we miscarried again. And I just remember the disappointment was one that I had never experienced before with any other thing that had happened in my life. I just knew, I think it was because I really felt confident that we weren't done having kids. And then here we had 2 miscarriages. And it was a disappointment that was difficult because the journey that we were on, when we were in the middle of it, it was extremely difficult to trust in what I felt God had actually promised us. It was difficult to believe in that. And so I even began to grow skittish, if you remember. I was skittish of everything that I was doing. I questioned every single thing that I did, everything down to what kind of water I drank, to whether or not I felt like I should get on an airplane. I analyzed every single thing that we did, and so by the time I got pregnant again, so a 4th time in my life, I was so guarded. I was not even willing to allow myself to get excited when we saw that positive pregnancy test. I wouldn't allow myself to feel hopeful. I don't even think I allowed us to begin preparing that bedroom for our son until I was in the final days of my pregnancy. And I even remember I had a couple really good friends at the time who wanted to throw me a shower. And I just remember that I was even worried about that. And so the condition that I required in order to let them throw me a shower is that it was the only gifts that I wanted were diapers and gift cards, because I was so afraid to assume that I would actually meet my baby. I didn't want to fill up a closet full of clothes and all these personal things that I was worried that I wasn't going to even get to hold my son. And so I say maybe you're in that place right now. Maybe this is an experience that you're in currently. Maybe this is something you've been through. Maybe it hits home for you. And if so, just know that we completely understand. There is nothing like the fear of repeated miscarriage. But I share all that with you for a reason, and it's to let you know we did eventually have a child. That prior to the journey of miscarriage, we did feel like God had promised us. I mean, I felt confident that God was assuring me that we would have more children. And so once we finally had our son, we chose the name Isaac because it was through him that we had to learn this extremely difficult lesson of trusting God's timing, trusting his purpose. And while we may not have been old like Abraham and Sarah when they had their Isaac, we were not that age, but we identified with them just because
of the longing.
Yeah, we wanted that child so badly, but it didn't happen on our timeline. And we can look back now and we can see how God's timing and his plan was perfect in all of it. But naming our son Isaac was intentional because we wanted him to be a constant reminder for us of the lesson that God had taught us through him.
Yeah, for sure. And that's just really kind of only part of the story there. I mean, this son of ours, Isaac, I mean, he was this gift that we had prayed for so hard for. And he's also continued to be the source, even now, of many lessons for us as parents.
Right.
And because he has by far, I mean, he's been our most challenging child to parent so far.
Right.
I'm not saying that to throw him under the bus by any means. I mean, every kid has their different things, right? We have our own different things as well. So believe me, we love all three of our kids, absolutely. But God definitely created each of them in a unique way for all three of our kids to be unique. And so far, Isaac has been the one to kind of test our abilities, our parenting abilities, the most.
Yes, for sure. But we tell all of you this because it's in those moments of utter exhaustion. It's in the moments we're overwhelmed, we're at our wits' end. Those are the moments where we can lose sight of what God has done and what he's promised. We're all guilty of that. Because of the gift that Isaac was for us, and the answer that he was to so many of our prayers, he should be a constant reminder of God's faithfulness, of God's love for us, for how he cares for us and how he hears us. But our circumstances can often shift the status of our ability to see God's hand. But this passage that we were talking about, specifically this part tonight, it's his warning against this very thing. He specifically tells us and warns us to be careful. And he warns us not to forget that he's provided for us, and that he is taking care of us and that he always will.
Absolutely. And, that's kind of in the passage, Moses even says, he talks about a land with large flourishing cities you did not build. He says houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. And so we've kind of, as parents, we've simply got to keep ourselves in check, kind of reminding ourselves, who our true source of provision really is when it comes to the things that we need in life and have in life, and remembering that everything that we have, everything, is a gift from God. It's because he has given it to us. And in our journey with Isaac, God gave him to us. He's a gift to us. And we were both really overwhelmed with gratitude when he was finally born. But it's kind of crazy though, how quickly we forget the things that God's given us, and that it comes from him, and that thing and that person or whatever it is a gift from him. So when we're throwing our arms up, not knowing how to handle discipline, not knowing how to handle certain behavior issues, man, we often feel inadequate. We feel, exhausted with all of it all. But when we focus on the circumstances of it all, or the circumstances in our lives, whatever that may be, and not the God who controls the circumstances, or the one who can provide the solution to the circumstances, we forget that he gave us our children when it comes to as we parent. And so therefore, we got to remember that he chose us. For Isaac, God chose us, and he equips us with what we need to parent him.
That's right. However, we're not suggesting that this is easy to do. We absolutely know that the circumstances that we find ourselves in are such a loud voice that carry an awful lot of weight. But the things that we've talked about in all of these previous episodes leading up to this one, such as weaving conversations in about God into your daily rhythm, this is much of a benefit for raising your kids as it is just for you. Because the more that God is a part of your everyday, the more likely you are to continue remembering why you trust him.
Yeah, so if it's easy for us as parents to get distracted from remembering that, then you know that it's also easy for our kids to get distracted from remembering that. I mean, we got to remember that kids they're still fairly new to this planet, right? Mm-hmm. And our oldest is 11, and so he's been on this planet only 11 years, right? And if you have kids younger, then it's even shorter time than that, or even if they're 15 years old. I mean, they've only been on Earth for 15 years, right? Which really is not that long. And so the question is, how can we instill in them this unwavering trust in God as they inevitably face hard circumstances in their life? And so now, I know that you're familiar probably with the old and probably outdated and really probably shouldn't do this, but the phrase that sometimes parents say, "Do as I say, not as I do." And I know sometimes we may say that jokingly, but if that is our mindset, though, that for our kids to do as we say and not as we do, it's really not a healthy phrase, a healthy mindset to have when it comes to parenting, because the truth is, more than likely your kids are going to do as you do. And that's the case with the way that you talk. That's the case with maybe the music you listen to or the words they hear from the music that you listen to. That can be the case with how we lose or really find our tempers. Sometimes our kids, we may go, "Oh, why is he acting like that? Why is she acting like that? Why are they responding that way?" Well, if you think about it, most likely they've seen you respond that way. Most likely they've seen me respond that way. Right? And so the list can go on of all the things that they do that we might do. And so this is also the case for what you don't do as well, right? I mean, because if your kids don't see you modeling, a lifestyle that relies on God, then we really as parents shouldn't be surprised when later on down the road, they're not living a life that relies on God as well. So if your kids experience God only at church once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month or whatever it may be, then they will most likely not see that walking with God is a daily thing.
Yeah, but how can we instill in our kids that unwavering trust in God? And I think that's where it goes back to conversations. We invite our kids to be a part of what God's doing. Not that you need to share every single detail of what's going on. Some things are not necessary for kids to know, right? But if you're struggling with a decision that maybe you're trying to make for your family, pray about it together as a family. Invite them into that.
It gives them the experience of seeing God move.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you discuss it, say things like, I'm trusting that God will lead us to do the right thing. And the amount of details that you might or might not share about the situations will, of course, depend on the stage of life that your kids are in, their ages, what they can handle, what they can comprehend. With little ones, I know you're probably sitting there like if you have a 2-year-old, and they don't even speak in full sentences yet. But there are things that you can do with little ones too, and I think that you'd be surprised how much they really are learning and remembering about all of this, about what they're seeing you model. And so it can be as simple as just praying about something repeatedly. I know that we shared several weeks ago that we do pray with our kids at bedtime. So maybe there's something that you pray with your child, and then when it actually happens, if that thing that you pray for actually happens, immediately point it back to God. Give him the credit. And it makes me think, I know we keep talking about Isaac, but we were not.
There are good things.
There are great things. And Kevin was not exaggerating when he said he's taught us so many lessons. But several years ago, I think he was around 3, he wanted so badly for it to snow. And so I remember the weather had just started cooling off. It was early fall. And he was already begging for snow.
Every night.
And as you know, if you live here in Virginia, we don't even, there's not even a possibility of snow until January. Maybe late December, but anyway, so it was early fall. begging for snow. So we just started praying about it together. And so he would begin asking God every single day, every single night for snow. He would beg God. I mean, I remember him even saying things, God, will you please, please, please make it snow? But this went on for days and days and months, all throughout the fall, all throughout the winter. And then finally, it snowed. And I will never forget the day that snow came. I mean, snow is magical anyway, but then to see an answered prayer, and it seems so simple, but to be able to see him experience the answer to that prayer. But here's the thing, here's what made it even cooler, is that first snowfall came, and I will never forget Isaac going to the window, seeing those snowflakes coming down, and immediately he just gasped and he said, wow. He said, God did it. And so anyway, I get emotional because it was such, again, one of those things that Isaac taught us, though, how to pray for something, believe that God's going to do it, and then when he does, immediately point it back to him.
Well, and that's what, that's what prayer does, right? Prayer is one of those things that when we stop and we take the time to talk to God, it is us recognizing that he is God and that we are not, that we need him, right? And that, and so your kids, they need to see who's in control. They need to know who's in control, that it is God and it's not us, right? And so they need to know that they do need to know that you're the head of the household.
Yeah.
They need to know that you're their authority, that you have rules, that you have boundaries, that there is discipline that will be happening in the home. But they also need to know that the details of your lives, the plan for your family, that it matters to God, that it matters to the God who formed your family to begin with. Like he's the one that's in control of it all. And not only do these things matter to him, but that God is like I said, I can't say it enough, that he is in control, and our kids need to see that we recognize that as well.
Right.
In fact, in Proverbs 19:21, it says this: many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. So one of the best things that I think that we can do as parents, is to give your kids repeated opportunities to see and experience that it's true, that God does have plans, that God does have purpose, and that God does answer prayers.
That's right. So now, we've talked about our circumstances, whether good or bad, and how they can cause us to forget God. And so, and we've talked about gifts or good things that can cause us to forget about God and forget about our need for him as well. And so as we think about closing out this series, I just want to talk a little bit further about a particular gift that can cause us sometimes to move God down on the list of priorities. And this gift can cause our own personal relationships with him and our reliance on him. It can even cause our worship of him to become second fiddle in our lives. And honestly, it can even become an idol. And so here's what I'm talking about. I'm going to read you a very short verse that probably you've heard. Psalm 127:3, and says, children are a gift from the Lord. So we know that our children are gifts. Absolutely they are. And we should love them, right? We should love them. We should cherish these gifts that came from God. But this warning, that where Moses was saying, be careful, that warning applies here as well, because even though our kids are an incredible, precious gift from God, they can also take our focus away from him, and they can get to the point where they reign supreme in our lives.
Absolutely. And so listen to Luke chapter 14, verse 26. Jesus says this as well. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple.
And that's a pretty staggering thing to hear. We think about Jesus, right, as he's full of love. We think about love when we think about Jesus. And so this verse is crazy when talking about hating. It can sound that way.
Yeah, it can sound that way. But remember, the first and greatest commandment that we hear in this Deuteronomy passage at the very beginning, in verse 4 and 5, But also we hear Jesus talk about it in the New Testament as well, of course, and in other parts of the Bible. But it's the first and greatest commandment. And it's what Moses says earlier in Deuteronomy. And it is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, everything, basically with everything we've got, with all of our heart. But in this verse that we just read in Luke, talking about, hating our own father or our own family, Jesus doesn't actually mean that we should hate
Right.
our own family. That would contradict everything in the Bible about love. And so he's basically using a hyperbole here to really make the point that he is everything, that he should be everything. Because of who he is, because of all the things that he's done, all the things he's given us, including our own children, including our families, our love for him ought to be so great based on what he's done for us and who he is. Our love for him ought to be so great that in comparison to that, everything else looks like hate. So it's really a hyperbole. Because when we get it out of order, then we're prone to live our lives focused on and giving ourselves to the gifts themselves and not the giver of the gifts. And so when you look at your life, so think about this for yourself. When you look at your own life, where does your love for God rank? Think about that for a moment. Where does your love for God rank? And don't just gloss over that question. It's easy, I think, for some of us, if you're a Christian, it's easy for us to go, of course. God's first in my life. He's first. He's number one. And, I think every Christian probably says that. But for many of us, and I'm guilty of this completely as well, like I'm human too, I'll say that. But when you really think back to your past week, ask yourself this: how has my life shown that he is, in fact, number one? So how has my life shown, just in the past week, that God is, in fact, number one? What have I prioritized over that? Is it my job? Is it my bank account? Is it my home? Is it my spouse? Is it my family? Or maybe is it even my children or my child? So think about that question. Like, what has my focus been on more this week? Has it been on the things of God, the love of God, or has it been on all these other things?
Very good. So, and we need to think about that too, everybody. I think that's always a good evaluation for anybody. So, Kevin.
Mm-hmm. That's me.
To wrap up everything that we've discussed both tonight and throughout this entire series, how might you simply put it for everybody as we close?
Simply put it. Okay, so first of all, this whole series has been really about remembering, first and foremost, who God is. We've talked a lot about that, what he's done for us. And ultimately, we need to remember that God has given us, he's given everything for us. He's given, ultimately his own son for us to the point of death on the cross for us to make a way to live with him forever and to know God. And we want our children to know and to love him as well. So as parents, we've talked about how we can lead our kids on a daily basis to love God with all of their heart. And it's in the rhythm of each day. And so that means that the home in which we raise our kids, like the things that go on each day in our home, the climate of our home, the focus of our home, the repeated conversations, like all of those things, all of that over time is what make the biggest impact. It's what's lived out on a daily basis. And so right now, like, you're raising the adults that you want your kids to become someday. And while I know that seems like an overwhelming thought, an overwhelming task, I encourage you to consider this today. Like, just think about this. Each day, think about this. What can you do with?
Very good. Yeah, parenting is so hard. Don't focus on your mistakes. I actually just before this, I actually saw something on Instagram. There's an author that I follow, and she posted something, and it said, I feel like I'm gonna mess it up. It said something along the lines of, your parenting is not just your worst days, but it's also your best days. And I think that's great for this. Like, we just keep looking forward. Think about what you can do next. Today. Just take today. I encourage you to wake up each new day, spend time with the Lord, start it off right, and just the next thing. Focus on the next thing.
And with that, remember that God gave you the gift of, Like he thought of you, and he gave your child to you, not to us, not to someone else. He gave your children to you. And if he gave them particularly to you, then there's a reason for it, right? And so we got to remember that he's with us, that he loves us, that he is for you, that he is for your kids as well, and that he's worthy of your trust, he's worthy of your worship, and you, through him, you can do this.
That's right. So guys, it's over. We have had such a blast hanging out with you guys here every Wednesday night for the last several weeks. Just keep in mind, if you ever need anything, any help, any advice, feedback, do not hesitate to let us know. We thank you so much for tuning in and for joining us.
Thanks so much.
All right, bye-bye.